So I went to university. Obviously, I moved back in with my parents after uni because obviously couldn't get a job. So moved back in with my parents. Stayed there for a few years, and at times it was quite difficult because you're an adult, but you're still living with your parents. And then I moved out, got married, moved out for a few years, and then we realized while we were renting, it was very difficult to save for our house. So moved back in with my parents again. A couple of pivotal moments. Definitely the moment that I spoke about, being 18, being robbed at gunpoint. That was a big moment in my life that definitely shaped me for a while, I would say. It was definitely traumatic. It was way before the conversation about mental health. It was just literally a space for me. That's why it's called MusicFootballFatherhood, right? It's probably not the most easy name to say and everyone gets it wrong. But it was literally more just like, these are the things that I love, and I would really want a platform that incorporates these three things.
Welcome to another episode of A Conversation with Great Leaders. And today I have the pleasure of talking to someone who is the founder of MusicFootballFatherhood. He's worked in the civil service for a while. His last role there was like head of diversity and inclusion for HM Treasury. And he's also a renowned author of the amazing book, Dad, which we're definitely going to delve into today. He's won like multiple awards, from the UN. He's got a documentary out. He's a man of many talents, and he's someone who absolutely admire for the work that he's doing in this space. I have Mr. Elliott Rae in the house. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm good, man. I feel like with that introduction, I would be blushing if I could. Obviously, I can't. If I could blush right now, I'll be going red.
I think it's so interesting when people listen to their own intros, and it makes me curious actually. How do you like to introduce yourself?
I find it very uncomfortable sometimes. Like, it's weird. I don't know. Not that I'm not proud or, I don't believe in myself or anything like that. It's just a bit weird hearing people like list off your achievements. And so sometimes when people ask me to introduce myself, I don't even know where to start, to be honest. Because I'm like, do I start with kind of what I do, or do I start with why I do it? Or do I start with, the achievements? So yeah, it's an ongoing thing. I'm still figuring that one out.
How often do you actually take time to even recognize the achievements that you've had?
I think, recently, in the last few weeks especially, I've been having I've been thinking a lot, and we'll be sitting sitting down with my wife, and it'll be about 9 p.m. and maybe we're sitting down and the TV's on, and then I'll just come out with some thought that I've had that day, big thoughts. I'm thinking big at the moment. Some big thoughts around politics or just psychology or speaking and the work and I'm just in the zone of thinking a lot, trying to connect a lot of dots and trying to work out, I guess, my place in the world, my purpose, how I best use my time and energy. And so when it comes to achievements, I guess, yeah, I think about them. Not necessarily looking back, but more about why we do things. I think it's very easy to do things to have another accolade. But actually, what I've realized is that all those achievements have just come from doing the work. And so for me, it's just about focusing on doing the work, and then what happens, and those list of things happen, but it doesn't happen from seeking that. It happens from the work when, no one's really watching, and when you're tired and you don't feel like it. It's about finding discipline over motivation, So I think it's just, I look back, but more as a reminder to just keep doing the work.
That phrase actually, discipline over motivation. I think it's one that's not easy to achieve, but one that is necessary to be able to succeed in whatever it is that you set out to do. I guess I'm curious if you were to go way back to like a younger 6-year-old version of Elliot, what were you like then?
I was football mad. Still am, to be fair. Very much into sports. I think I've been quite obsessive. Like I remember obsessing about things, and I'm probably the same now. Like I get into something, and I'm in it, and I'm so excited about it and passionate about it, and I want to know everything about it. And I think that trait has definitely stayed as well. Competitive, I would say. I've always wanted to win at sports day. To be the fastest. There was always one boy, Stephen. I beat him once, but he was super quick. But we would always be like 100. Well, probably was 100 meters at 6 years old, right? 20 meters or whatever it was. We'd always have the sports day race. So yeah, I think that always like having lots of friends, being sociable. When I was younger, I was shy at times as well. Though there were moments where I wasn't as confident as I could have been, and I think that's something I take into my parenting now, actually. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Looking back at your childhood and how it shaped you and how it shapes us now.
Did you want to become since you're so into like sports and football, did you want to become a footballer? Or was that the path that you had in mind even as a teenager?
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be Paul Ince. And I saw Paul Ince at Euston Station. He blanked me. I was like, Paul, mate, like, what are you doing? You were my childhood hero.
They say never meet your heroes. They always say that.
He got off the train. Fair enough, he might have been a rush, but I wasn't asking for his autograph. I was literally just it was an acknowledgement. And he just looked at me, blanked me, and walked off. And I was like, Paul, man, like, come on. If that was Ian Wright would have stopped and said hello.
Why Paul instead of Ian? Because in those days, like I'm thinking, yeah, why Paul?
Do you know what I'm a QPR fan, but Man United were the big team at the time, I think, and obviously Paul Ince being a black man, he's a midfielder. I played in midfield. So yeah, I guess he was someone that I looked at and saw myself in. Top of his game. This is like the 90s, right? 96, 97. So that was a team, and they had that black kit. The black kit, I think it was Sharp VCAM, with the yellow writing at the front. And yeah, Ince was just the guy, So yeah, never meet your heroes, man, at Euston Station. Just get on your train. Just go home. Don't bother stopping. What about you? You're a Gooner, right?
I'm a Gooner. Mine's Ian. Ian Wright and Thierry Henry have been and Dennis Bergkamp. Those have been my three go-tos.
Have you met them?
And I met Ian actually. So I had a brief. Ian was great. I've not met Thierry Henry yet or Dennis Bergkamp, but Ian was just like a man in a minute. So he was just busting jokes. So that was cool.
Yeah. I met Ian Wright years ago. This was like, I was about 17, and my cousin Jordan, he worked in a hotel, and posh hotel in London, and they used to give the people that stayed there would give him tickets to things because he got on with people, some of the people that come to stay in the hotel. And we had tickets to Wyclef's party. It was some exclusive party in London. Bearing in mind, we're like maybe 16, 17. So we rock up to this party now, and Wyclef's just like warming up. He's there with his wife. And we met the Sugar Babes, and all these people were there. And then Ian Wright was there. And I was like starstruck. I was literally starstruck. And I remember meeting him. I must have shaken his hand. And he was like looking at me, expecting me to say something. I just said nothing. I just stared at him.
So you're holding Batman's hand, just looking into his eyes like...
It was so awkward. I was just there, just like, that awkward silence where I was just looking at him like, and he was waiting for me to, obviously people normally say, oh my gosh, you're my hero. I just stared at him. Like, just looked at him. So I need to meet him again and be like, sorry, mate, I know that must have been super awkward for you.
Wow. But I can see that though. I can see how that happens. You need to make, you know what? That's one of the things. As part of your building out which we're going to talk about a bit more as well, but building our music football
Mm,
fatherhood. You should invite him down.
definitely, definitely. Why not?
And when you talk about you being so sports obsessed and into obviously playing football and everything else like that, did your parents come out to your games when you were younger?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Not all of them, but my dad would be at some of them on a Sunday. Um, but yeah, they weren't the parents that my parents. I think were very realistic, um, and they were very supportive in lots of ways. I think supporting my football career wasn't. Don't get me wrong, they supported my football career. I can't say they didn't, but I was never going to be a professional footballer. Like, and I think they knew that. But yeah, my parents were very supportive in lots of ways, though. And I was actually watching something yesterday, a psychologist who talks about generations, and she was speaking about the millennials being very, very still dependent on their parents for babysitting, financial support, help with mortgage deposits, or just emotional support. And my parents have definitely been that for me and my sister. A big support. And in this conversation that I was listening to, they were talking about, obviously you got gaps in maybe graduates, non-graduates, race, class, etc. One of those that they were saying we should add was the availability and ability for your parents to help support you through life. And people who do have that parental support, into adulthood, how that can just give you an advantage. And yeah, I think for me, my parents, we're lucky enough to have that. My parents are still together. They've evolved over time. Like my dad was very strict when when I was young, very very strict, and now he's like the most chilled out person ever. So yeah, it's interesting how our relationship has evolved and how I've seen them change and how I think parenting develops. You go from the very parent child relationship to hopefully becoming friends when you're older. And I hope my daughter and me can be friends when she's 25, 30. We can sit down and chat and get on and just like each other, like to be around each other and enjoy each other's company. So yes, it's I feel very lucky, very very lucky at the parents I've been blessed to have.
One, it's great to hear that obviously your parents are still together, but even that evolution over the years of just being parents to
Mm.
friends to change, it's not something that is the norm actually for a lot of people when you talk to them, whether it's from those who are African backgrounds or Caribbean backgrounds, is there still this relationship there as you get older that can sometimes just change slightly, but there's still some of those frictions are still there. But hearing that evolution from you and your parents, it
Mhm.
sounds really amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's had to learn and adapt, because so I went to university. Obviously, I moved out, moved back in with my parents after uni because obviously couldn't get a job, so moved back in with my parents and stayed there for a few years. And at times it was quite difficult because you're an adult, but you're still living with your parents. And then I moved out, got married, moved out for a few years, and then we realized while we were renting, it was very difficult to save for our house. So moved back in with my parents again. And that was interesting. They thought they got rid of me. And now I'm come back with a wife and child, and they're like, so moving back into the same room, a very, very humbling experience, but moving back into my same room. But there was tension there, obviously, like at parts, but it was great. We managed to save all our money because didn't have to pay rent or council tax or anything like that. My parents helped out with childcare and stuff like that. So, when I was talking about just being lucky to have that support,
Mhm.
it's those kind of things. We moved back for 18 months and then we'll manage to buy our first house. But yeah, I'm not saying that it was always plain sailing. There's always a bit of power dynamics going on, especially when you're living back home. But we're in a place now where I can look back and be like, wow, is that what you two had to contend with? You came over here from Grenada and St. Vincent. My dad tells me about him and his brother sharing the living room in the house. The living room was their bedroom. They had a fold out kind of bed, sofa bed. And he always talked about my grandma, used to love to entertain and have people over. And on school nights, he had to wait for the visitors to leave before him and his brother could get the sofa bed out and go to bed and go to school the next day. And they were in primary school at that age. So for him to, go from that to raising two children, to doing well in his career, being happy. They go back to Grenada every year for a few months. Yeah, it's very inspiring to see. Very, very inspiring to see. And I think it's so important to have those models at home. I think even for me, over and above like success, but it's more about communication in a relationship and seeing my parents talking. And I remember my dad said to me before I got married, he sat us down, me and Snenny, my wife, and he'd had a few glasses of red wine by then. And he was talking about communication. And he was saying, look, the most important thing, your task when you get married is to always talk to each other, always communicate. And I thought about it over the next few days, and I thought about the amount of times as a child I'd be upstairs in my room just hearing my mum and dad talking. I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm just hearing them talking. And when he was saying that, I was thinking, it's true, all my childhood, I've just heard you both talking, like to the point where it just becomes sounds, right? I'm not even listening to the words, but I've always heard you always talking to each other. And I think it's just powerful advice in a marriage, just to have that communication where you're always talking to each other. You're talking about your day, your feelings, you're asking questions, you're curious, you're sharing. It's so important. So yeah, those things are valuable advice.
Even more so, the reason why you can relate to that and take it on board is the fact that you saw your parents doing it. A lot of times you hear people
Mm.
like, "Oh, this is some great advice." You're like, "Yeah, but you didn't do it, so why am I going? Why am I going to listen to you?" But you can go back into that memory of, actually, yeah, that was true. That I saw you modeling this, and therefore I recognize
Mm.
the fact that you're not just saying it because it sounds nice. You're saying it because that's how you operated, and that's what's made a difference for you.
And I guess it goes back to the role modeling thing, right? Sometimes we learn from what people do rather than just what they say. That translates into the workplace. It translates into parenting, relationships. The actions are just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the words that we say.
It's interesting when I hear you talk about you moving back home with your wife, with your daughter. I know that kind of been an easy decision for you as a man. There's a lot of
Mm.
ego involved in making those kind of choices as well. And as you said that, my mind went back into there's a bit you wrote in your book about an incident that you had when you were younger, um, where you
Mm.
kind of got into trouble, was got involved with that kind of stuff. But it wasn't about that. It was more around the ego that was at play. And I'm curious, was that what helped you over the years, those kind of experiences, to be able to,
Mm.
I want to say, lay down your ego and just learn to be able to deal with it?
Mm. I think that's something that we all have to overcome. We have to overcome ourselves. I think overcoming ourselves is like very, very powerful. Like I believe we are, as individuals, all of us, capable of amazing things. The biggest barrier outside of obviously there are real barriers when it comes to access to resources and inequalities. But one of the biggest barriers is overcoming ourselves, getting out of our own way. And that means mastering, I think, the sometimes quite natural push to have an ego or to be too proud, to be too proud or to recognize our strengths and weaknesses, to ask for help, you know, kind of like all those ideas around what we would define as toxic masculinity and the bad parts of um of masculinity. And I think it's getting out of your own way and just being humbled, but in a good way. And I think we've all had our experiences that teach us certain things through life. And yeah, in the book, I think I wrote about a couple of those things. One being my daughter's birth and what we experienced through that. The other being the incident where I was, robbed at gunpoint, and it wasn't necessarily the act of that. It was more about the embarrassment of who was there at the time and who saw that, and that was for me looking back, I was more worried about the perception rather than my actual well-being and health. So overcoming those kind of things, getting to grips with that and processing those things, I think has helped me to do the work I do now, with a real heightened sense of self-awareness. I'm not perfect at all, but trying to be as self-aware as possible, as emotionally intelligent, as forgiving. Again, I'm a work in progress, but forgiveness. And yeah, I think we have to go through life's experiences to teach us those lessons, if we want to be the people that we can be to achieve our potential and achieve the greatness that I believe is in all of us, to do something. Like, I think we're all great at something, but getting out of our own way is a big part to achieving that, I think.
What have you found in, because prior to even doing what you do right now with Music Football Fatherhood, you spent a number of years working with a lot of young people. Um, so what have you found in your experiences has been some of the difficulties that can stop people from actually seeing what you've seen and getting their own way repeatedly, time and time again?
I would say a big part of it is going back to the example at home. I would credit me and my success and where I am completely down to my parents. Not to say that they encouraged me to do this. Actually, they hated the fact that they hate the fact that I'm like, not, I'll say hate, but they would much prefer if I had a steady 9 to 5. They would much prefer if I was, my first job after uni was as a cashier. Actually, I couldn't get a job. I studied business and marketing for my degree. I couldn't get a job. Spent about 6 months applying, just, no letters back, nothing. At the time, I don't think I understood the corporate game and probably who and what I was up against at all. Couldn't get a job. So my mum was like, "Why don't you come work with me in the bank?" So I was like, "Okay, cool." Applied for a job, got an interview, got the job. Didn't realize that meant literally work with me at the bank, sit next to me while you're doing your cashier job. So I'm there like on my best behavior. Yes, sir. How would you like a change? Okay. My mum's sitting right next to me. That only lasted for my induction, about 6 weeks or so. But and then I went on to work with young people, teaching them music production and being part of community projects. And I think when I talk to those young people who, they're big men now, they've got kids and whatnot, but speaking to them, I think what I had was stability at home, and there were certain decisions that I could have made that I didn't make, not necessarily because I was scared of the police or scared of health repercussions or whatever. I was scared of my dad. I was scared of what my dad's going to say. I didn't want to let my mum down. Didn't want to let the family down, you know? Didn't want to let the family down. So there's certain things where you're out of your home, you're out doing whatever you're doing, and if you have stability at home, in your mind, that's there. The lessons that your parents have taught you, or the awareness that you don't want to go home and tell your parents that you've done something that you shouldn't have done. So for me, I would put my personal circumstance and my the success I've had in life, I would credit it to that. Not to say that that's always the case. You can have parents that do a great job and things still go wrong. So that's not for everyone. For me personally, I think that's what I would credit it down to. But yeah, I do feel like it's probably a mixture overall of that stability at home. There's some of us we have different personalities. Some of us take longer to reach a level of maturity. Some of us want to be more accepted in the crowd just naturally based on who our personality type. We're all different. Some people might have luck where they're able to get a job or get an opportunity that takes them into seeing a different way of living, but for me, definitely it was accountability at home, I would say.
The impressions that we live as, or parents leave on us and then we leave on our kids is super, super important. And the way that you've been approaching that with the work that you've been doing around music, football fatherhood, has been very much wrestling around dads and having open conversations, talking about masculinity or toxic masculinity, and like what does it mean to be a modern day kind of father? And I'm curious, what was for you? What was that journey like, as in creating like MFF?
So I think, what is it to be a modern day father? So I get asked this question quite a lot, and I'm always very careful how I answer it because there is no one way, right? Like, I'm not the dad guru out here. Like, oh, dad, listen to me. Like my daughter will tell you I'm not the perfect parent. Do you know what I mean? I get angry sometimes. I'm impatient sometimes, when she's not brushing her teeth and we're late to leave. I'm not always this calm parent that's like, put yourself in their shoes. Sometimes I'm just like, brush your teeth. We need to leave.
Let's go.
I've told you 5 times. What are you doing? You're driving me crazy. Do you know what I mean? So I'm always very careful to not position myself as a dad guru, and that's not what MFF is about. It's not about telling people what's right or wrong. It's about creating spaces for conversation and sharing stories ultimately. So for me, the way I answer this question is it's not even what it is to be a dad. Actually, what is it to be a man? Because you're a man first, right? And for me, being a man now is simple. It's just being yourself. Being yourself. But I think for a lot of us, being ourselves is very difficult to do. It's very, very difficult to like totally be yourself. I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into, first of all, finding out who we are. Like, what do we believe? What are our values? How do we want to live our lives? What impact do we want to have on the world? How do we want our relationships to look like? Like, that is deep work. What do we like? What do we not like doing? So doing that work and coming to your conclusions as much as you can without being influenced by what we think we should be because we are men. So what we think a good man has been, which some of the models are good, some of the models are bad, right? There's some very toxic traits that we have grown up with that don't serve us, they don't help us. But because we have seen that modeled, we believe that's how we should be. For example, being unemotional, being stoic. Of course, I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for that, but living our lives being stoic for all of our days probably isn't a good way of just being a human being and existing in the world and building good relationships and looking after our mental health. That's probably not a healthy thing to do. So I think there's about being yourself. And when I was talking about, getting out of my own way, dropping the ego, all those sort of things, it's figuring out who you are, like outside of those external influences. That's deep work and that's hard work. But I think when we do that work, we might find out or come to the conclusion that actually, we do want to be and value community. We do value and understand our strengths and weaknesses, and we do actually want to ask for help and support sometimes. Or we do actually want to be vulnerable with our partner, like, and those things which I think are healthy. So yeah, for me, it's about being yourself and doing that work to figure out what that is. You're looking at me very thoughtful here.
Yeah, because you mentioned there's two things you mentioned right at the start and then right there as well as you expanded on that. What's the difference between being a man before a dad? Why is that important to have that distinction?
Like, a dad is a role that we play, right? Like, we are people first. I'm Elliott. A dad is something that I have become. I created life with my wife. She gave birth. My daughter came, right? But I'm a man first. We are people first. And I think to look at it from what kind of dad you want to be without looking at what kind of man you want to be, I think is a bit is the wrong way around. You need to look at what kind of man you're going to be first. If you can define that first and figure out that, the parenting side kind of comes out of that. You know, if you're looking at how you want to be in terms of your emotional well-being or how you communicate, how you speak and how you listen. You look at how you want to think, you know, and how much you're trying to, as much as possible, master and control your thoughts and those kind of things. That translates into parenting, and that translates into what kind of dad or mom or parent you want to be. But you have to do that work yourself first. And maybe that's even harder because parenting is like, okay, cool, I can be this person for that person. You know, I'm going to be like this for my children. But actually, what are you for yourself? What are you doing the work for yourself first? And maybe that's a more difficult thing to do. Maybe that's more introspective.
How did you begin to go on that path and that journey? Because we're talking earlier on around growing up in the city of London, friends, all that kind of environment that you find yourself in. It's different. It's a very different way of thinking about being a man, about having that introspection, about analyzing a number of different things that you kind of touched about. So what was it that kind of helped you go on that path and that journey and start to look at things very, very differently and exploring that?
I'll say I've always been like someone that's thought quite a lot. Like I've always tried to analyze things as much as I can. I would say a couple of pivotal moments. Definitely the moment that I spoke about, you know, being 18, being robbed at gunpoint. That was a big moment in my life that I think definitely shaped me for a while. I would say um, it was definitely traumatic. It was way before the conversation about mental health. um, but I was in a difficult place. But I had great, you know, my cousin and great friends who supported me through that. But I think it definitely did shape me in terms of wanting to be successful. I would say, if I'm completely honest, wanted to be successful as a way of like my own revenge. You know, to be like, okay, well, you tried to do this, but I'm still here. I'm still standing. Right. So I would say that is something that definitely shaped me. I would say meeting my wife. You know, um, she's someone who is she's such a good friend. Like she's such a good friend. Like she's an amazing friend to her friends and to me. But she just puts her friends first. You know, she's so accepting of who people are, and that is something I've learned from her. She's an amazing friend. I tell her all the time, I'm like, "You're such a good friend, man. I need to, I need to learn from you. Like, you're an amazing friend." And she's always like, you know, the maid of honor. She's always there. Every event we go to, she's like the one. She's the one to so many different people, you know. And it's just a testament to how people view her. So I think meeting her and what she's taught me in our relationship has really helped. And then I would say my daughter's birth, you know, the whole trigger for MFF and the work I do, it was from that moment. So beforehand, I was working in the civil service. I was doing people-based roles. At the time, I was in the Department for Transport. So this is 2015, like 7 years ago now. And we had a very traumatic birth experience where she was born with an infection called Group B strep, which, you know, 1 in 10 babies will die from Group B strep. 1 in 10 will have a serious lifelong severe disability. She was born with that. She was, you know, grey, lifeless. She wasn't breathing when she was born. My wife was bleeding out. So we spent a good couple of weeks in ICU, intensive care. Lots of ups and downs. One day the infection was going, one day it was coming back aggressively. The day when we got the news that we could go home because the infection had gone, my daughter developed a bump on the back of her head. And that's when the medical professionals, they were really worried about us. They didn't know if it was a tumor or, they didn't know what was going on. So we were booked in for an MRI scan the next day. And that night, by far the most difficult night of our lives. We just cried and prayed for hours. And there was a midwife called Nagmare who came in the room. She stayed with us all night. I'm sure her colleagues were wondering where she was, but she stayed with us all night. And we prayed and we cried. And it was like the first time I'd cried since being a child, but we cried. The next day, she went for the MRI scan. We waited back in our room. We waited for the nurse to come through the door. They'd burst every time we were in hospital. Those 2 weeks, they just burst through the door. They would not. They just burst in. So waiting for that burst, and then when she came in, she had her arms out, gave us a massive hug, and she told us that it was nothing to worry about. It was bone structure. We could go home. So after that traumatic event of nearly losing the two people who I love the most, going home, having the weekend, back to work, and in a job, fairly senior, a lot of responsibility, given grace for a few weeks of being a new dad, but pretty after that, just expected to perform again, get on with it basically. At home, my wife was diagnosed with postnatal anxiety. She would find it difficult to leave the house. I'd come home from work, still be packing the bag, 6 p.m. It's dark outside. It's October, November. So she was struggling. We were super paranoid about my daughter's health. We were in A&E probably once a week for the first 2 or 3 months. And, I'm very overall quite confident, quite extroverted, social, and I hadn't previously had any mental health challenges. But the lack of accepting, understanding, processing, the tiredness of just being a new parent anyway, all that trauma that I hadn't processed, that just came out basically. And I'd be on the train on the way home from work, just in tears, just not wanting to go home. Just I'd be knackered, up all night, couldn't sleep. I'd be having panic attacks in work meetings. I'll be able to not be able to talk, saying hello to my team, trying to say hello to my team in the morning and not being able to say anything, mumbling. Um, and so yeah, kind of didn't really talk about it apart from with my wife a little bit. Not to I wouldn't tell her everything, but I would, she would obviously pick up on things. But at work, try my best not to be honest about what was really going on for me. And then kind of by accident met a birth trauma specialist who 18 months later, who then kind of diagnosed me and got me support through that way. Took some time off work and whatnot. 18 months, yeah. So I went through 18 months. In between that, my daughter also had a severe wheat allergy, which is crazy. And so I should say a wheat allergic reaction to wheat, which is very serious. She's got an EpiPen now. But yeah, those 18 months, and what I learned from those 18 months is that it's so easy for us as humans to just put a mask on stuff. And I didn't understand that before. I didn't realize that. And in my naivety, sometimes I would even look at, people who had taken their own life, and I wouldn't be able to understand how the family didn't know. If I'm being completely honest, I wouldn't I hadn't experienced it. I'd always think, oh, no one knew. How did no one know? Do you know what I mean? Whereas now I understand. I'm not saying I was in a point where I wasn't having suicidal thoughts at all, but because I was masking what was going on, I fully now understand how someone can appear happy or excited, busting jokes or whatever. They could be going through the worst shit in the world, Like they could be going through some stuff and you would never know because they would just present as, you know, the loud one, the funny one. They would seem relaxed, like on the face of it. And the work I do now, whether it's with MFF or the work I do in companies, if I'm going in, I'm talking about fatherhood, mental health, masculinity, and my aim is to always have the vulnerable conversations. Basically, there's always someone in the room that's going through something. Always, always. Like it might be like 20, 40, 50, 100. There's always someone, at least one person, generally more, who's going through something. It comes out in the session, and no one would have ever known, you know? And I've learned so much, especially when it comes to men and men's mental health and ideas of being a man. Part of that is the stoicism, right? And the need to be strong, which is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. Like life is hard. We need to be strong, but just not. Sometimes there's time for vulnerability as well. And what I didn't do in those 18 months, and what I've learned, and what informs my work, is the importance of like getting out of your way. Getting out of your way. And so I think that is what has shaped me. And it's weird, even like sometimes in our worst, lowest moments, we learn a lot from it. And so for all of I'm grateful for all of my like all of the stuff, I'm grateful for it. I'm happy. I'm very happy with my life. And I think that's because I guess what I was able to do is take those experiences, to build on myself and build something else for other people. So yeah, I look back at everything with gratitude. I'm very happy.
I would say turning pain into purpose is always such a great way to be able to learn the lessons, but also to help other people to grow. And therefore, even when you look back on some of those painful experiences, you don't feel the hurt that was at that point, but you look back then more with the different set of eyes, which allows you to recognize what the experiences really were for. And it's such a great way to be able to go through life. Because there are times when we're like, oh, I remember when that was, and you feel that hurt coming up in your chat. But actually, if I've learned to process and utilize those experiences, then I no longer feel that. Instead, I can actually feel joy. They're like, yeah, but that's a tough experience. Like, yes, it was. And it still is. But there was something that was birthed through that. And that for me helps me to make more sense of it. Which, listen to your story, listen to you share that, is such a powerful thing. Because but generally speaking, a lot of us walk around life with masks on. And it's just so much more easier to do that than to open up and to share as to what's really going on. And to really bear that vulnerability, be like, no, this is how I'm feeling. And we end up protecting ourselves so much. And it's not a lot of times you actually hear a lot of men talking about that. It's interesting. I was talking to someone recently and they were talking about women, about black women particularly, and that whole strong black woman trope, which has been around for so long. And they're like, I don't want to be a strong black woman. Like, it's tiring. I'm carrying so much. I just want to be able to just let it all down and just be and just exist as a woman, and someone to just hear me, see me, look after me. And as you were talking, that's what literally came into my head, even as a man, that we feel this whole societal way of, as a man, I have to be stoic. As a man, I have to protect. As a man, I have to do da 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 da. Never wants to actually stop and do exactly what you're saying we should do. Like, no, slow down, check yourself. What's going on with you? What's going on inside of you? Let all that out, because if you keep on carrying that, it's going to bubble up to the surface in one way, shape, or form. And a lot of times when it bubbles up, it's not always in a positive way, it's in a negative way. And those around us feel that impact. So do some work before you actually let it get there.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
What's been, when you created MFF, how did that come about? I know it was a blog, and then you kind of, but did you always, when you started it, do you think it will become what it's become today?
I think yes and no. Like no, in terms of it was just literally a space for me. That's why it's called Music Football Fatherhood, right? It's probably not the most easy name to say, and everyone gets it wrong. And if I was looking at it from a branding perspective, I would probably call it something a lot easier to say and remember. But it was literally more just like, these are the things that I I love, and I would really want a platform that incorporates these three things. And I didn't. It wasn't necessarily super like strategic. It wasn't really. It was more what would I like to see? Cool. Music, football, fatherhood. I'm a musician. I play the bass guitar. I actually met my wife in a band together. Obviously, we've spoken about football and fatherhood, so it just makes sense.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it wasn't a big strategic thing, but at the same time, I did know that there was something missing. When I was searching for things on the internet, I just found Mumsnet, but there wasn't really anything written for many men, especially not from black men. So yeah, I knew there was definitely a space. So it started off as a blog, when in those 18 months that I spoke about, one of the symptoms actually of PTSD, especially depression as well, is kind of like distracting overworking. And I think part of me and my dealing with that period of time was to feel like I had some control. So I had little control in many parts of life. So one part of life I could control was just having my own little blog. So I could write, I could control when things go up, I could design it. And it's just like a nice little thing to have that was a release from everything else. So I would just work super hard on that. And I remember, like, at the time I couldn't really afford to build a website. So I learned how to, do some like basic coding, and I got a template, and I kind of adapted that with the coding and stuff like that. And I would stay up just late. Obviously couldn't sleep. So I just stay up just doing that, for a good year, maybe like year or so, publishing articles. But no one was really reading it. Like, I wouldn't say anyone really cared, but it was just me writing a little blog. So a few people would read it, but it wasn't a big deal or anything. But I just kept going. Just kept going, kept writing. More people would come on board. I invited a few other dads to share their stories as well. I think Dan was one of the first guys. He was the football writer. Dan and Peter, they were the first guys I think that came on board. They were writing about football features, and then other dads was like, "Oh, I want to share my story on your blog or whatnot." So that was cool. And then in 2017, there was a lady called Simone Stewart. She got in contact. She saw what we were doing, and she wanted to do a piece on us. And she was a BBC online video journalist. So she came to my house and filmed a video in our garden with four of us and our kids, and it's just talking about MFF and what we're trying to do with it. And then she called it the Mumsnet for Dads, and that was like the catalyst for everything else, I would say. That's when it became not just something that I was doing, but that other people would talk about as a thing. And that's really interesting, like when people start talking about something as its own entity, which is really interesting to me. Like now it happens quite a lot, even in one of my my workshops that I do, I thought of a new model for how we can build better relationships on Sunday, incorporated it on the Monday, and then people are now talking about it as a thing, this thing. And I'm thinking, I just thought of this yesterday, literally in bed, like, and now it's an entity in itself. But yeah, it was really weird when people started talking about MFF as its own entity, or have you seen this? Or why don't you join this? You would hear those kind of conversations, or people would say to me, "Oh, I saw your thing." Like, so yeah, from then, that's when it all started from the other level, I guess, when more dads would get in contact. And then I wrote a piece for The Independent, actually about being a black dad, and that was shared, I think, like 18,000 times in a day. And this was probably in 2017. So it was before, kind of like, that's probably not big numbers now, but in 2017 that was a popular article that a lot of people kind of read and resonated with. And from there, yeah, we just kicked on. From there. The platform has been through lots of different iterations. At one point we had a forum on the site that didn't quite work. We were doing kind of dad family days before COVID. So we've kind of learned what works, and now I'm very clear about the impact we want to have, the level of discussion we want to have, and how we want to do it. So we have the Lodge, which is our monthly online sessions. The next one's on the 30th of November, and it's going to be covering men's health. We have a specialist coming who's going to be talking to us about prostate cancer and testicular cancer and cardiovascular diseases and how we can get better at, checking ourselves, going to the doctors and stuff like that, and going through some of the statistics. So the Lodge is really powerful. It's online, it's free, it's on Zoom, monthly themed sessions. They really work in terms of creating community. The podcast is good. We're relaunching season 3 on the 14th of November. So that's really a kind of impactful thing people really enjoy and take value from. And then our partnerships with football clubs. So we've done QPR, Brentford, and now we have Arsenal coming up on the 27th of November. And our events are called Extra Time. They're football-themed fatherhood conversations, all about safe spaces for dads to connect and discuss, which is what all of our work is about. And they are really impactful as well, So it's about thinking about, for us, we've developed over time, what is it that is most impactful in terms of impacting people, and what are the best ways of doing that. And it took us a few years to work that out, but now we're more clear about where we focus our efforts. And the website is a place where we can publicize all of that, as well as, share the odd article about what's going on as well. And our social media, we use that in the same way. Our social media is essentially to publicize the things that we are doing in terms of the content and the community events that we're producing. So yeah, it grew very, very slowly, but we always had, nice things happening along the way, which really gave me encouragement, especially as I had a full-time job. The team grew. We've got a team of like 20 kind of volunteers who help to write and do strategy and co-host events. And we have a social media manager called Matt Brown. So yeah, over time it's just grown, And early last year I took the decision to finally leave my full-time job, which it was kind of like, I have to do it now or never. The book was coming out, our book Dad was coming out, and I knew that I believed in the book so much that I had to give it my full-time attention and see what could happen. And I'm so glad I did, because the last 18 months have been wild. I've been mad. If you had told me this 2 years ago in 2020, November 2020, if you told me November 2020, what's going to happen over the next 2 years, I would have liked to say I would have believed you, but I probably wouldn't have believed you, to be honest.
But it's one that's been full of you doing something for yourself and then putting that time and work, and people saw what you were doing, they wanted to get involved, and it grew and grew and grew. And then you had to back yourself, which is what, like, that journey is. I think a lot of times people see like, oh, this looks amazing, this looks shiny. I'm like, yeah, but do you understand the process it took to get them? In releasing something for a year and not really getting much traction from it, a lot of people can easily give up. But you're like, no, I'm doing this. And you kept on doing it, and it kept on expanding. And the book's amazing. And I'm sure, again, being a man, being a provider, being a husband, a father, all those different things, even making that decision just to be like, I need to go all in on this. Again, it's not always the easiest thing. And that was just coming off the pandemic. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like this was like a rosy period. Like, things were not the easiest thing in the economy. A lot of stuff we're feeling right now was all there. But you made that decision, and it's great to see how much you've all grown. You've grown in particular, but what MFF keeps on providing and keeps on expanding and giving out, because the space is necessary.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's like backing yourself. I'd say I backed myself twice. I backed myself at the beginning, which I think is the hardest one. Like, at the beginning, normally there's this process I look at. You announce something, everyone's really excited about it. Oh my god, you're announcing something new! It's the new shiny thing. Hey, let's all retweet, excited. 6-7 months later, when it hasn't necessarily blown up, because most things don't blow up straight away unless you've already got a platform, which I didn't at the time, people naturally will become less excited about it. Like, they'll still support you, but they're not as excited, right? It's not a shiny new thing. That is the hardest time, because that's the time when you need to keep going and push through and believe in yourself, because maybe the people around you and whatnot, I'm not saying they don't believe in you, but they haven't seen it blow up, so their attention goes to the next new thing. So how do you get through that period? That's the hardest period. That could last like 2 or 3 years. That could last a while. But being consistent, like I've thought about MFF every day for the last 7 years. I've done something to forward it every day. There's not one day I haven't thought about it. Not one Christmas Day I think about it. Do you know what I mean? Like there has been not one day I haven't thought about what can we do to build this thing, and either done something or at least thought about it every day. So I think at the beginning it's hard because you need to keep going and believing in it when maybe you don't have that support there. And then I think the process happens is that you get maybe a big feature, or you get a big interview, or you get, something happens, right? Because that's normally how the world works. Like people are looking for things. If you've been there for 2 or 3 years doing it, saying it, sooner or later, normally something will happen and it goes to another level. People come back at that point. You're on a how do you build from there? And so for me, that's exactly what happened. When the BBC thing happened, cool, we're on another level now. But the second time I think I backed myself was leaving my job, early last year, leaving my job. And I'm looking at the bills and be like, look, I just need to make £1,000 a month. I was saying to Snenny, look, just need to make £999 a month, baby. And we won't be homeless. And why I say she's been so good is she's like me, right? She's very creative. She believes that we don't have to live this life that we've been told. So she's very much like that. And her dad, who passed away last year, there's a dedication from him in the book, but he was a massive inspiration to me because he was like 70 and starting a new business and stuff. So she was supportive of that, and she supported that, and she believed in it. But yeah, just to leave, But I think that's the thing. To anyone listening, like if you've been working at your thing and you believe it can work, and you can see how it can work, and you put that work in, you have to back yourself sooner rather than later. You have to, because this tension of a full-time job taking up all your time versus you have this thing here which you're building is actually succeeding to a certain extent, but they're likely in most cases to always clash, and you'll always have to give up part of what you can give into your thing because you have to spend so much time at work. There's always going to be a moment where you have to think, I need to jump, have a safety net if you can, have some savings and whatnot, but jump, back yourself, put 100% effort into it and see where it can go. Like it might grow so much just because you can dedicate so much time to it. So for me, when I left, I knew the book was coming out. I was working at the Treasury at the time. I was head of diversity and delivery, head of diversity delivery at the Treasury. So that was a big, busy job. I just finished putting the book together. Super stressful time. Father-in-law had passed away. My wife was at her mum's a lot of the time. So I had my daughter on my own. She was grieving. We were all grieving. She would wake up crying at 2, 3 a.m. Go to work. Tough working environment, very high pressured. So yeah, stressful time. But I knew I had to take this leap and give this thing my 100% attention. And I did. And the book did so well. And that has kind of helped me to carve out a career as a facilitator and a speaker, taking the lessons from my personal experience, from MFF, from my corporate experience to work with organizations. It's meant that the book inspired a documentary, a BBC documentary